Do you have any idea how much this jacket costs? The man snapped, coffee dripping from the sleeve of his Armani blazer onto the tile floor. The young waitress stood still, her eyes calm and fearless. She replied softly, "But it seems you don't know who I am." No one in the cafe could breathe. Just a minute later, the entire 45th floor conference room would go silent as that same girl walked in. No apron this time. Want to know who she is? Keep listening, and you'll find out. The woman stepped down from the silver SUV, her delicate face calm but far from fragile. Her name was Lila, 32 years old, the interim CEO of NXT Capital, a notorious investment firm known for its multi-million-dollar deals. But today, she wasn't headed to a boardroom. No sleek office awaited her. Instead, she walked into a modest coffee shop tucked away on a quiet corner. Lila wasn't just a competent leader. She believed that how someone treats those with less power, that's the kind of value worth investing in. On the table in front of her was a thick file on Lemeron Group, a company in deep crisis, yet with a promising tech backbone. A $30 million deal was on the line, and the man at the helm of Lemeron, George Ashford, was the very reason Lila paused before putting pen to paper. George had a reputation: seasoned CEO, sharp-minded, and of course, very familiar with power. But Lila didn't invest based on paperwork alone. She needed to verify something else: character. Her assistant had quietly arranged for Lila to go undercover as a waitress in the cafe George frequented every morning. White t-shirt, brown apron, hair tied back neatly. No one could tell that the woman pouring coffee and wiping tables was the same one who once brokered $100 million deals. Monday morning, George arrived. Tailored suit, expensive cologne, and a gaze that swept over people like they were dust. Lila brought over his coffee, trying to appear ordinary. But just as she placed the cup on the table, someone brushed past behind her. The tray tilted. A stream of hot coffee spilled, dark brown liquid splashing directly onto the sleeve of George's shirt. He shot to his feet, chair crashing behind him. Heads turned. He roared, "What the hell is wrong with you? Are you blind? This is a custom Zegna from Italy, you idiot." Before Lila could respond, George grabbed the other cup on the table and, to everyone's horror, poured the still hot coffee over Lila's head. A quiet gasp rippled through the cafe like a wave. Coffee dripped from her hair down her collar, pattering onto the tile floor. Silence fell. But what stunned people even more was Lila's expression. She didn't cry, didn't scream, just looked at George for a long moment, then calmly said, loud enough for all to hear, "Sir, maybe today's the day you ask yourself, what's more valuable, an expensive shirt or basic human decency?" George scoffed, unaware that the woman he just humiliated was the very person deciding whether to invest in saving his company. And the harshest truth was only just beginning. The 45th floor of the Lemeron building was lined with dark gray carpet, cold white LED lights running the length of the hallway, casting reflections on the polished stone floor like a mirror. George Ashford stepped out of the elevator, leather briefcase in hand, his polished shoes striking a steady rhythm against the tiles. He took a deep breath, as if stepping onto a stage. Today's meeting wasn't just a presentation. It was a make-or-break test. George knew exactly how bad things were. Cash flow was drying up, the team was in chaos, and product timelines were falling apart. But if he could land an investment from NXT Capital, everything could turn around. He was the kind of man who'd flip dead-end deals into victories, armed with hypnotic charm and an ego too large to ever bow. And today, he was certain he'd do it again. As George entered the glass-walled conference room, his personal assistant, Marcus, was already there, standing quietly near the table. "NXT's rep isn't here yet?" George asked, flipping through his documents. Marcus shook his head, voice low. "Heard they sent a new interim CEO to replace Ms. Davis. Very private. Tough to read." George smirked, unable to hide the disdain in his voice. "Interim still means temporary. I'm the real CEO, over 10 years in the chair. Don't worry." He took the head seat, sat tall, and adjusted his dark blue tie. In front of him was the large presentation screen, already loaded with a finely tuned pitch. Impressive numbers, projected growth charts, persuasive language designed to inspire trust. George knew how to craft illusions, and he wasn't shy about using them. The wall clock struck exactly 9. The glass door clicked open. The sound of heels, steady, confident, echoed across the room. A woman stepped in, wearing an ivory blazer, her delicate face calm, eyes composed. Her hair still held a hint of dampness, as if freshly washed, or maybe from coffee. George stood, as manners dictated, but the moment his eyes met hers, his face froze for half a second. It was her. The cafe server from this morning. The one he poured coffee over. The woman offered a soft smile. "Apologies for the wait. I'm Lila Monroe, interim CEO of NXT Capital." The air left the room. George didn't move. His hand rested on the table, fingers subtly trembling. The tie he had so carefully adjusted now felt like it was choking him. Lila sat, opened her folder, calm and collected, as if this morning had been nothing but a test, a trap, and George had walked right into it, carried by his own pride. George sat frozen, like an actor who'd forgotten his lines mid-scene. He wasn't the type to lose control, but in this moment, every cell in his body screamed that something was very wrong. Lila flipped through the documents, eyes never meeting his. Her hair, still dotted with dampness, the undeniable evidence of this morning's spilled coffee, contrasted sharply with the steel in her demeanor. The room grew heavy with silence. Marcus, George's assistant, glanced between them, his lips pressed into a tense line. George forced a smile, his voice cracking slightly. "I think there's been some kind of mistake. You were the server this morning, weren't you?" Lila looked up, her brown eyes carrying a blade's edge. "I'm Lila Monroe. And yes, I was once a waitress, but not this morning. This morning I was conducting a test. Want to guess what I was testing?" George chuckled weakly, starting to say something, but Lila didn't wait. She slid a photo across the table, a still from the cafe's security camera. It showed George, mid-sneer, dumping a cup of hot coffee over her head. The audio clip? Still attached, complete with every insult. "You once said servers should know their place. I agree. But today, I'd like to know what you understand about the qualities of a true leader." Lila's voice was calm, steady, no yelling, no threats, and that composure made George break into a sweat. He swallowed hard. I sincerely apologize for this morning. I had a rough start. I didn't realize you were," Lila cut in. "If I were just a regular server, you wouldn't be apologizing. That's the point." The air in the room thickened. George gathered himself, trying to pivot. "Personal matters shouldn't interfere with business. I believe the plan I presented today makes it clear to you and to NXT that my company has real potential." Lila raised an eyebrow. "I've read your plan. It's solid. But I don't invest in numbers. I invest in people. And today, all I've seen is a man who loses control when things don't go his way." George clenched his fists. The first blow had landed hard, but he was a seasoned player. He smiled faintly. "Then give me a chance to prove myself, not just through documents, but through real action. I'm willing to let you keep observing." Lila nodded, the corner of her mouth curling. "Oh, I'll be observing, but this time no disguise is necessary." George slowly twirled the pen in his hand, his palms soaked with sweat. The more he tried to appear composed, the more he felt the suffocating tightness of the premium leather chair beneath him. Lila didn't open a laptop, didn't pull up any charts on revenue or cash flow. She simply leaned back against her chair, eyes fixed on him, her voice slow enough for each question to drill deep like a bore. "How do you handle a crisis when the fault lies with an employee?" George smiled, trying to regain control. "I believe in systems. If someone makes a mistake, we investigate, find the root cause, and deal with it through proper procedure." Lila gave a slight nod, as if mentally something down, but her eyes never left him. "And what if the mistake is yours?" George stopped spinning the pen. That question wasn't in the script he had prepared. I'm not perfect, but I always put the collective good first. If I make a mistake, I fix it." Lila didn't react. She shifted slightly, then asked again, this time her tone softer, yet somehow colder. "Who do you believe deserves a second chance?" George swallowed hard and nodded. "I've always believed people can change. A second chance is necessary, as long as the person knows they were wrong and tries to make it right." Lila looked down, reached into her bag, and pulled out a napkin, still stained with dried coffee. She placed it gently on the table. She didn't say a word. It sat there, small but undeniable. George glanced at it, then quickly looked away. If a server made a small mistake, how would you react? The silence that followed lasted only 3 seconds, but it landed like a verdict. George stammered, gently pushing the napkin aside. "This morning, I truly didn't know who you were. I I didn't mean to. I didn't ask whether you knew who I was, Lila interrupted, calm but commanding. I asked if a server brought the wrong order or spilled something by accident, how would you react? George lost his patience. I already apologized. I had a dozen things going on this morning, and you, well, she, spilled coffee on my shirt first. It's not like I got angry for no reason. A justification and a confession. Lila nodded again, slowly stood up, and walked over to the large window overlooking the city. Without turning back, she said, "Crisis doesn't start with a mistake. It starts when the person in power refuses to take responsibility." George said nothing, and for the first time, he didn't know what to say to save himself. Less than an hour after the tense meeting in the boardroom, while George was still grappling with his carefully curated image of perfection, an unexpected event unfolded. A customer who had witnessed the incident at the cafe couldn't stop laughing as he recalled the unbelievable moment. With his phone in hand, he had captured the exact moment Lila got doused with coffee and uploaded the video with a cheeky caption, "When you don't know who you just spilled coffee on." The video instantly caught attention. One comment led to another, and within minutes, it went viral on TikTok, drawing viewers who couldn't help but like or share. "Unbelievable way to handle a situation," one person wrote. Others started tagging friends, remarking that they'd never seen a CEO behave that way. What started as a small incident suddenly became an internet phenomenon. The public wasn't just shocked by George's outburst. It was the fact that someone like Lila, appearing at the time to be just a server, had been the victim in such an awkward moment. And like a wave crashing ashore, the video didn't stop at TikTok. Major financial news outlets, always tracking movements in the business world, began to pick up the story. Tech company CEO under fire after coffee spill incident. Could this unprofessional behavior jeopardize George's career? CEO's angry outburst toward cafe worker, a cautionary tale for modern leadership. The comments kept pouring in. George began receiving calls from partners and the press, all demanding an explanation. Unfortunately, his explanation failed to convince anyone. On social media, people weren't just remembering the coffee spill incident, they started raising bigger questions about George's leadership abilities. They saw a powerful CEO who lacked patience and was weak when facing unexpected situations. Immediately, everything spiraled in a direction that couldn't be stopped. Important partners of the investment fund began reevaluating their decisions. George's reputation, built over years in the industry, was quickly collapsing. Lila, now known as the server in the video, had become the center of attention. She was the only one who knew this was just the beginning of the game. She sat quietly in a corner of a small cafe, opened her phone, and read the comments about the video. This wasn't the end of it. She didn't just want to change George's mind. She wanted to change how the world viewed power and true leadership. The meeting room on the 45th floor was steeped in silence. After the coffee video went viral, all eyes were on Lila, the woman who, this morning, everyone had assumed was just an anonymous server. Now, she sat at the head of the table, dressed in a light gray suit, her gaze calm yet sharp as a razor's edge. George's face was pale, sweat beading at the back of his collar. He tried to smile, lifting his glass of water, but his hands were shaking so much that he almost knocked it over. Lila slowly opened the file, pulled out a draft of the investment contract, and placed it on the table in front of George. "We, NXT Investment Fund, have spent 2 months evaluating your company," she began, her voice just loud enough to be heard, but each word seemed to reverberate off the glass walls. "We see potential in the product, a remarkable technical team, and the market is ready for the next big breakthrough." George nodded vigorously, trying to interject. "I knew you'd see that. This morning was a misunderstanding. Lila raised her hand, decisively cutting him off. Her gaze never wavered. "But we cannot invest $30 million in a company run by someone who lacks both vision and character." The entire room held its breath. Her words didn't come across as a personal criticism, but as a verdict. George stammered, "I've been running this company for 10 years. Lila continued to stare at him, unblinking. "You've run it well until people saw how you behaved when you didn't know you were being watched. And it only took a 13-second video for that perfect picture to collapse." Her voice was slow, not angry, not threatening, just the truth, bare and undeniable. George turned to the board members sitting at the end of the table. They lowered their heads, silent. Lila pushed the contract toward them. However, she said, her voice slower now, slightly softer, if the board agrees to replace the CEO, and we are willing to renegotiate. The atmosphere in the room shifted. A flicker of hope appeared in George's eyes, but then he saw the look of disappointment and finality in the eyes of a senior board member. Lila stood up, straightened her blazer. Our fund doesn't just invest in models. We invest in people, and we believe the CEO is the soul of the business. She walked out of the room, leaving behind a stunned George and a board facing the biggest decision in the company's history: keep a tarnished CEO or accept the cost to save the future. George didn't say anything as Lila left the room, but his eyes, for the first time that morning, were no longer frantic. Instead, there was something else, cold and calculating. As soon as the glass door closed, he leaned toward his trusted assistant and whispered just 3 words, "Activate the package." The assistant hesitated for a moment, then quickly nodded. She knew exactly what the package meant. A series of documents, edited videos, fabricated emails, all prepared years in advance as a backup for George in case he was cornered. And now it was time for him to play the dirtiest card. Less than an hour later, an anonymous Twitter account suddenly posted the information. The acting CEO of NXT Fund was once involved in a suspected conflict of interest during a 2020 investment deal. Along with it was a blurry video, seemingly taken secretly at an elegant party where Lila was speaking intimately with an older man. The post was immediately pushed by bots. Within just 2 hours, it had tens of thousands of shares. Several fake accounts began commenting, "Didn't expect her to be so dirty after all." A tabloid with little credibility quickly jumped on the story, running a bold headline, "Investment Fund Director Had Shady Relationship with Financial Partner." George sat in his office, sipping coffee and smiling. "I might lose the contract," he muttered, "but I won't let some girl still wet behind the ears disgrace me in front of the whole industry." That evening, George personally sent an anonymous email to a financial reporter revealing that the NXT fund may be run by someone with questionable personal ethics. There was no verified evidence, but there was one thing he knew for sure: the media thrived on scandal, not the truth. Meanwhile, Lila was in a meeting with NXT's legal advisor and communications team. She reviewed the post, video, and comments. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in analysis. "I guess George didn't walk away quietly," she said, then turned to her assistant. "Find out where this video came from, and who posted it first." "Are we suing?" the assistant asked. Lila shook her head slightly. "Not yet. If he's chosen to play dirty, we'll make him trip right in the mud he created." She picked up the phone and dialed a contact listed only as JM, Internal Investigation. "Start," she said briefly. "I want to know how much dirt he's prepared before he opened his mouth to curse me this morning." 36 hours after the anonymous post spread, Lila reappeared, not in the boardroom, but on NXT's official live stream, a platform typically reserved for investment reports. This time, however, the title was shocking: "The Truth About the Interim CEO and a Cup of Coffee." Calm and unflustered, Lila sat straight in front of the camera, her tone even, clear, and as cold as steel. "I have nothing to hide," she began, "and there's no need to justify myself to those who use mud to build power." The screen cut to an unreleased video, a clip from the cafe's internal camera the day George threw coffee on her. Unedited, uncut. The image was sharp, the sound crystal clear. "What kind of servant spills coffee on me?" "You idiot, who do you think you are?" George shouted, standing up and hurling the steaming cup of coffee onto Lila, who was still in her staff uniform. She responded calmly with one line: "Thank you for showing me how you would react when faced with a small mistake from someone else." The footage paused on George's stunned expression as he heard her words. Back to the main screen, Lila continued. "The account that posted the defamatory video is linked to a media company that previously received hidden funding from George himself. The video was edited, taken from a charity event in 2020 where I and Mr. Kleshin, Lawrence, the strategic director of NXT, were discussing investment policies for immigrants." She smiled lightly, not angry, but coldly. "Mr. Lawrence has also confirmed this in writing." She held up a folder in front of the camera. We didn't just investigate the defamatory behavior, we also discovered a separate fund created by George, used to withdraw personal money from the company through fake consulting contracts. The list of transactions has been sent to the Securities Commission. The screen shifted again. Spreadsheets, emails, and statements with personal names blurred but showing clear financial details. No one can hide their true nature forever, she said. And in the investment industry, the most important thing is not just the money you make, but how you make it. The live stream ended with a line: "Respect is not an option, it's a standard." The next morning, the hashtag "Respect is Standard" hit the top 1 trending nationwide. George's company stock dropped 19%. The board of directors called for an emergency meeting. Lila sat quietly in her office, watching the sunlight reflect off her cup of coffee. This time, no one poured it over her head. But she hadn't forgotten. The game wasn't over yet. The board of directors of Lemeron Corporation called an emergency meeting the following morning, right on the 45th floor. The room that once witnessed George walking in arrogantly with his bright red tie now became the place to decide his fate. The news from Lila's live stream triggered a chain reaction. Investors fled. The stock price plummeted uncontrollably. On social media, the search term "CEO throws coffee" topped every search list. More importantly, there was a severe loss of trust from partners, including the NXT fund, which was preparing to invest $30 million to rescue the company from a severe financial crisis. The meeting began. Lila was invited as a representative of the investment fund. She arrived on time, not a minute early, not a second late. No longer in a service uniform, no longer with coffee stains, Lila wore a charcoal blazer, her face calm as if no coffee encounter had ever happened. But her gaze was sharp, as patient as a razor. George was also present, pale but still trying to maintain a composed demeanor. He knew well, if Lila spoke, something big would happen. Lila stood up, no slides to present, no documents to flip through. "We cannot invest $30 million in a company led by someone who lacks vision and character." The room seemed to freeze. She stared directly at each board member, then stopped at George, but didn't show a hint of emotion. However, the entire room looked up. "If the board agrees to replace the CEO, we are open to renegotiating. The assets, market share, and technical team of Lemeron are still valuable. But we don't invest in numbers, we invest in people. And the current leader does not meet that standard." One of the board's CFOs whispered to the person next to him. Another nodded. George's face turned pale. He knew that statement was no different from a death sentence for his career. The board chair leaned back in his chair, his hands intertwined, silent for a few seconds before speaking. "Miss Lila, we understand the message. A vote will be held immediately." In just 7 minutes, 6 out of the 9 raised their hands. George didn't wait for the final result. He stood up, smirking, trying to hold his head high as he walked out of the room. But no one looked at him. Every gaze was fixed on Lila, the woman once seen as a nameless waitress, now controlling the entire fate of the game. As George left the building, the large screen in the main lobby flashed the morning news. Lemeron Corp officially replaces CEO, resumes negotiations with NXT Fund. A gust of wind passed by, light and cold. But Lila didn't shiver. She only smiled, because what needed to happen had happened, and what was to come, she would lead.
Oh, my dear. The story of Lila, you see, is not just a simple game of business. It's a gentle yet sharp reminder of how we treat others, especially when we think they have nothing to retaliate with. Do you know people are not measured by the positions they hold or the stocks they own, but by how they treat the vulnerable? Lila could have stayed silent. She could have avoided the confrontation, but she chose to face it, not with anger, but with intelligence and integrity. In this life, we'll encounter many Georges, those who are used to wielding power to impose their will, and there will be times when we are Lila, looked down upon, misjudged. But in time, perseverance and self-respect will show who truly holds value. So if someone hurts you today, remember, you don't need to shout. Just stand firm, keep moving forward, and when the time comes, you'll speak in a way that will silence the entire room. Live like that. All right?